Today, we're going to dive into the absolutely turbulent first half of the 20th century. It was a time of, on one hand, these incredible leaps forward, but on the other, this almost unprecedented moral collapse. We're going to see how, in just about 50 years, an entire world of certainty was just completely flipped on its head, really setting the stage for the world we all live in today. You know, this quote from George Bernard Shaw just nails the feeling of the era perfectly. Just imagine for a second that everything you believe to be solid, permanent, your society, your values, your own future, suddenly starts dissolving right from under your feet. That feeling, that sensation of freefall, is what defined the shift from the old world to the new. All right, so before that foundation completely crumbled, what did it even look like? Well, that was the Victorian world, a society that genuinely saw itself as the absolute pinnacle of civilization. They thought they were, the final perfected version of human progress. The sheer confidence of the Victorian era is just striking. They didn't just think their way of life was good. They truly believed it was the final version. The home, the British Empire, the religion, these weren't just passing institutions. They were seen as these unshakable, eternal truths. The very idea that they could be replaced was almost, it was unthinkable. And this really shows you the fundamental clash in thinking. You had the Victorian world, which was built on this bedrock of permanence, authority, and just acceptance. But the 20th century spirit that rose up to challenge it, it was the polar opposite. It embraced change, it questioned everything, and it was driven by this powerful, almost primal impulse to revolt against that old order. So, what on earth caused this massive shift? Well, the engine of all this change was the scientific revolution. But this engine didn't just move society forward, it kind of pulled it in two completely different directions at the same time. Towards progress, yes, but also towards peril. So on one hand, you get this incredible, breathtaking progress. The internal combustion engine gives us the aeroplane and the car, and suddenly millions of people have a freedom of movement that their ancestors could never have even dreamed of. It felt like the whole world was opening up. But here's the flip side. That very same technology brought absolute devastation. The airplane, this beautiful symbol of freedom, became a tool for mass slaughter in 2 world wars. The car, which promised this wonderful escape, also let young people escape parental control, which started to erode those traditional social structures. It really seemed like for every single step forward in technology, there was a moral step backward. And this is where the voice of George Bernard Shaw really comes in and defines the new era. He basically argued that a society that's so willing to scrap its old machines should be just as willing to scrap its old ideas. The new watchwords of the century were question, examine, test. And under this new way of thinking, absolutely nothing was sacred anymore. Now, this fundamental break from the past, this new habit of questioning absolutely everything, was perfectly mirrored in the world of literature. This is where a really deep and lasting divide was about to form between artists and the general public. You can almost pinpoint the turning point to a single year, 1922. That's when James Joyce's Ulysses and T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland were published. It was like serious literature just turned its back on the average person, retreating into this fortress of intellectual complexity that most people just couldn't access. And this created 2 totally distinct camps. On one side, you had the Fabians, writers like Shaw and H.G. Wells. They believed in art for life's sake, the idea that literature should serve the community, that it should be accessible to the common reader. But on the other side, you had the modernists, like Joyce and Eliot. They championed art for art's sake, and wrote for what they called a small, fastidious public, basically an intellectual elite. This split between the elites and the majority, it wasn't just happening in the art world. The post-war era saw these massive social and political changes that gave rise to a whole new kind of person and a whole new kind of society. And this created a fascinating and totally unintended chain of events. The welfare state was born with this incredibly noble goal of providing security for everyone. But a really strange thing happened. When the daily stress of poverty was removed from millions of people, the contentment that everyone expected, it just didn't show up. Instead, this kind of sullen discontent started to grow, and the ideal of the individual common man got replaced by something totally new, mass man. So what exactly is mass man? Well, it's the individual who gets lost in the crowd, swallowed by the herd. See, when a state is designed to manage and provide for millions, it starts to legislate for the average, for the majority.
And in a system like that, the unique person, the eccentric, the non-conforming individual, they just become invisible.
This new society very quickly became a consumer society. With more security came this new desire not just to own things, but to display them. This fueled the rise of the hire purchase system, basically letting people buy status on credit. It was the birth of keeping up with the Joneses, and it was all driven by this new, sophisticated kind of advertising that targeted our subconscious desires. All of a sudden, your value wasn't really defined by your character, but by what you owned. So how did the next generation react to this new world of mass conformity and consumerism? Well, they rebelled. And this was really the final stage of that 20th century's spirit of revolt we've been talking about. This rebellion really took shape in movements like the Beatniks. Their core philosophy wasn't to try and reform society, but to just contract out of it entirely. They looked at the affluent, conformist world all around them, decided it was completely debased, and just said, nope, we want no part of this. And their rejection of the mainstream was total. They showed their disgust through an indifference to personal hygiene by adopting this uniform of jeans and baggy sweaters, and they sought refuge in things like Zen Buddhism. But here's the huge contradiction. By hitchhiking and accepting handouts, they were still living as beneficiaries of the very same affluent society they claimed to despise so much. Ultimately, this whole spirit of revolt just spiraled into a widespread contempt for all authority and all standards. And the problem was, intelligent satire, which actually requires a deep understanding of what you're critiquing, it got replaced by simple, witless ridicule. The goal wasn't to reform society anymore, it was just to tear it down for a laugh. It was a shift from critical reform to just chaotic destruction. And this leaves us with a really powerful question. Looking back, maybe the so-called hypocrisies of the Victorians were actually a form of commendable modesty and self-restraint. In our massive rush to tear down that old world, did we accidentally trade those virtues for a culture of public performance and a relentless passion for exhibitionism? It's a question worth thinking about as we navigate the world they left behind for us.